Welcome to the Policy Shop, weekly conversations with public policy experts where we'll dive into the most important issues affecting all of us here in Illinois. I'm Hilary Gowins. Let's get started.
J.B. Pritzker's in Florida and Lori Lightfoot is overseas in Europe touting our economic recovery from COVID. Back home, people are facing a much different reality from what our top politicians are selling. Joining me to talk about Illinois' job situation and what it means for you is Bryce Hill, Director of Fiscal and Economic Research at the Illinois Policy Institute. Welcome, Bryce.
Thanks for having me.
How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Can't complain.
You've been hard at work tracking all of the economic data that have been coming out recently. One thing that I thought was really interesting was a bit of polling that came out of Monmouth University. So I know we're on track for this November election to really focus on a couple of hot button issues that IPI does not touch on. But according to what people care the most about right now, this Monmouth poll finds that the majority of Americans list inflation and gas prices as the top two concerns, followed very closely by the economy. So I think that the people are most focused on the things that are costing them money and where they're feeling the pinch right now. Is that your sense for what the data are showing you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, people are obviously very concerned with inflation. Month after month, we hear these headline inflation numbers that are, the highest in 40 years. So people obviously have very real concerns and they feel that every day in their pocketbook and when they're trying to make a family budget. So I'm not very surprised that that's dominating headlines or concerns based on recent headlines. And then, the economy we're flirting with, maybe already in the start of a recession. So, we've devoted a lot of attention to that. Lots of talking heads out there talking about what this could mean. So to see that people are really concerned about that isn't very surprising either, because these are the things that affect people's day-to-day lives the most. How can they provide for their family, not only with, future and the future of prices, but also, am I going to have a job? Have I been able to find a job?
So I mentioned up top that, on the one hand, we've got Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot abroad talking about Chicago's economic recovery. And then we've got our governor doing a tour here in the States, talking about the same thing, that things are going great in Illinois and Chicago. But is that the reality?
The reality of the situation is that 1 in 6 jobs are still missing from the Chicago economy. And that's the same at the state level. So when you look at prior to the pandemic or jobs that were lost during the pandemic, we've seen a lot of them come back, but there's still 1 in 6 that are missing. We're still missing 16% of the jobs that we lost. And, we have kind of hit this kind of stagnant period of where we don't know if these jobs are going to be coming back, especially as there's a lot of uncertainty related to the economy hanging around. So, the situation is kind of dire. The situation is worse in Illinois than it is in most other states. The U.S. economy is getting close to a full recovery. Illinois' recovery is one of the worst in the nation. The unemployment rate's the highest in the Midwest. And at the same time, when you look at Chicago specifically, to speak to Mayor Lightfoot's assertion that the Chicago economy is really poised for a comeback. Chicago's economy has one of the highest unemployment rates of any metro area in the United States. So, lots of other large cities are struggling as well, but to paint a rosy picture is just misinformed at best and disingenuous at worst.
What are some of the things that continue to make the recovery here more challenging from a policy perspective?
So one of the main things is going to be the long-term problems that haven't been addressed. So we have, obviously crime in Chicago has been, a headline getter, but the issues that really keep businesses away and prevent businesses from thriving go deeper than that. So massive unfunded pension liabilities prevent, businesses looking to invest in the state or people looking to invest in the state from doing so, because those are long-term commitments that they have to make. Those problems are long-term problems that keep growing. And that means that, in the future, businesses and families are going to be tapped on the shoulder and asked to pay more for these bills that are coming due. So that's one of the biggest things. The second would probably be, regulation, and, that has wide ranging effects from, job creators and businesses to housing affordability. So on top of the high tax burden and looking like that's not going to be going anywhere anytime soon without reforms, we're going to continue to see businesses leaving. We are going to continue to see housing becoming unaffordable because property taxes are rising, affecting both renters and homeowners. And then just the overall burden of regulation, trying to start a business here in the state of Illinois, or even in Chicago, is incredibly tenuous and difficult. There are lots of hoops to jump through, and they prevent people from doing what they do best and, providing for themselves, small businesses from becoming employers and hiring new employees and expanding. So these are the long-term issues that are affecting the state that are really going to be what makes or breaks us for whether or not we actually fully recover from early 2020.
Now, you mentioned long-term fiscal problems that need to be fixed, reformed. But a lot of the headlines recently have covered the big companies that are leaving the state. So like Boeing and Citadel and Caterpillar. And I remember back in 2015, the former CEO of Caterpillar wrote an op-ed, and he basically laid out a lot of the same things that you just said. He said that if Illinois didn't get its tax and spending under control, that people would be forced to make this really difficult decision to leave. So I know you already laid out the policy issues that we need to confront, but from your perspective, what kind of tone does it set when these big businesses leave for other job creators and job seekers?
I think that it kind of opens the floodgates, so to speak. So, lots of small businesses have been leaving already. Small businesses, individuals who are self-employed. These are really where the bulk of the businesses are. And so when individuals are leaving, you're certainly losing new businesses and entrepreneurs. And the state of Illinois and Chicago have been doing that for a long time. Population has been in decline for now 8 consecutive years. In the most recent year, Illinois lost almost 115,000 residents. Chicago lost nearly 50,000. So those people are already leaving. But now, as we see these big moves, the Caterpillars, the Citadels, the Boeings, I think it's going to cause other, the people in the small, mid-sized businesses that are, employing 20, 30, 40 people to start seriously considering that as well. It kind of, it gets the ball rolling. And it's a signal to other large businesses as well, as, Chicago and Illinois are not places you want to be doing business. If some of the most successful companies in these industries can't seem to make it work here, how can other maybe less successful companies try to make it work here?
One thing I know you're going to be focusing a lot on here in the coming weeks is property taxes. And specifically in Chicago, a recent headline that has jumped out to both of us, I know, is what's going on in the city in terms of the mayor's move to tie property tax increases to inflation, which wasn't as big of a deal before. But now, of course, that inflation continues to go up, we're expecting to see some pretty big jumps in terms of what these bills look like. Can you preview a little bit of what you're going to be looking into here in the next few weeks in terms of what people need to know?
Absolutely. So, headline inflation in the most recent report was 9.1% year over year growth in prices. According to the most recent analysis by the Chicago Tribune, the city of Chicago's property tax levy would be up to the tune of $86 million by tying to inflation. And if that holds, then that's going to be a massive jump. So for homeowners in Chicago, that's going to be, likely hundreds of dollars in additional property tax bills. And that's just from the city of Chicago portion. That doesn't include increases that could come from, whatever park district or county Cook County or any other overlapping layers of local government that also affect your property tax bill. So that's just one individual portion of it. So when we look at, really how this is going to affect individual bills, a couple $100s is probably the low end. And then when you look on the high end, you're talking about potentially thousands of dollars in additional costs per year that are really just, obviously another byproduct of inflation that aren't even captured in, headline CPI as it gets reported on in the news.
All right. Well, Bryce, any parting thoughts before we wrap up here?
It just really doesn't sit well with me to hear politicians out there touting how great things are and being misleading, because we talked about how businesses leaving, what the tone that sets, but the tone that politicians and your community leaders being out there saying one thing when it's not true, when they're in other areas, campaigning, so essentially, kind of rubs me the wrong way. It really, the tone that sets is one of, we're going to ignore the problem rather than we're going to get our hands dirty and actually fix it. So it's incredibly frustrating, I think, and Illinoisans will feel that, and probably that is something that will resonate with a lot of them. So, it's going to shape up to be an interesting campaign season to see, how the media reacts to these claims, how voters react to these claims, and hopefully at the end of the day, it pushes us towards somewhere where politicians become more serious about the reforms that the state and the city of Chicago need, so that, we can begin to turn things around.
Well, the thing I like about you and your research is that the numbers don't lie, and you'll continue to keep an eye on Illinois and Chicago's economic recovery and what the numbers really show us. So thanks for all the work you do, Bryce, and we'll stay tuned for your next piece of research.
Absolutely.
Listen and subscribe to The Policy Shop wherever you get your podcasts.